Ever get that feeling, like when you're trying to solve a problem and you just feel stuck? Like
Yeah.
the solutions you're coming up with are just kind of like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic.
Oh, yeah,
And
definitely.
it's like you need a totally fresh perspective. Like you need to zoom out and look at the whole system, not just the little pieces.
Absolutely. I think we've all been there where those conventional solutions, they just don't cut it.
Exactly. And that's exactly what we're diving into today, this idea of a systemic design lab.
Mm.
So think of it as like a space,
Hmm.
right? It could be a physical space, it could be virtual, it could be some kind of hybrid,
Right.
but it's a space that's specifically designed to explore how transitions happen in these really, really complex interconnected systems.
Yeah.
And, the stuff that you sent over for this deep dive, it really digs into some of the key elements for setting up this kind of lab.
Right.
And what we want to do today is unpack how these seemingly different fields, engineering, art, and these things called embodied practices,
Right.
how do they all fit into this lab? I mean, it might sound kind of strange at first to think about those all working together,
Yeah.
but the sources are saying that their interplay can actually lead to some super valuable insights.
Oh, for sure.
So let's start with engineering. When you first looked at all this, what struck you about engineering's potential role in a systemic design lab?
Well, one of the things that immediately jumped out at me was this inherent tension
Mm,
between, the material was really emphasizing this holistic, interconnected perspective,
right.
which is, absolutely core to systemic design.
Yeah.
But then it contrasted that with the more traditional engineering approach,
Right.
which often focuses on, breaking down problems into smaller parts
Okay.
and finding specific solutions within the existing framework.
So dissecting versus connecting.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Mm.
Okay, so is the concern then that engineering with its focus on finding like precise fixes to specific problems
Yeah.
that might not naturally align with the kind of like big picture thinking that's needed for system-wide change?
Yeah. I think that's definitely a concern.
Have you ever felt that frustration?
Yeah.
Like when a complex issue gets oversimplified into these isolated parts?
Oh, yeah, all the time. I mean, it's like you're trying to understand this intricate web of relationships,
Yeah.
and someone comes in and just wants to like pull on one thread
Right.
without realizing how it's connected to everything else.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So you're saying there's this potential disconnect between that really focused approach
Hmm.
and the need to see the whole system with all its connections to really figure out where to intervene.
Exactly, where the real leverage points are.
Right, right. But the material also presented like another side of engineering,
Yeah,
right? It wasn't all doom and gloom.
they're not at all.
So what was the other perspective?
Well, the other perspective really emphasized how engineering principles and technology can actually be incredibly valuable enablers within the lab.
Hmm.
The key point here is that they're seen as tools, as facilitators.
Okay.
They help power the processes and networks, but they're not the ends in themselves.
Right. So it's like technology isn't the solution,
Right.
but it's the vehicle.
Yeah, it's like the vehicle that helps you get to the solution.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I think one of the sources even mentioned AI in this context. Like
Yes.
using AI to help sift through massive amounts of data.
Right. Because with these complex systems, there's just so much information. And
Yeah.
AI can help us process all that data,
Hmm.
identify patterns, and gain a deeper understanding of the dynamics.
So it becomes a tool for understanding.
Yeah, it really becomes a powerful tool in the lab.
Okay. So engineering evolves from just building stuff to like a method for navigating complexity.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. But the sources also pointed to a potential like friction point
Yeah.
between the way engineering often works and the kind of environment that a systemic design lab needs.
Right. And the discussion really highlighted this tension between the often linear, outcome-driven mindset in engineering
Right.
and the lab's need for paradox, for these creative clashes that can spark new ideas and lead to emergence.
So it's about embracing the messiness,
Yeah.
the unexpected turns.
Exactly, because sometimes you need those opposing forces to
Yeah.
really break through the old ways of thinking.
Totally. So it's not about finding a straight line from problem to solution.
No.
It's more about creating the conditions for something new to emerge.
Exactly.
And I thought this was really interesting. One of the sources talked about using engineering tools to measure things like resilience.
Yeah. Yes.
That's so cool. The idea of like quantifying resilience, it's almost like putting numbers on something that feels inherently qualitative.
Right.
Can you even do that?
Well, that's the challenge and the potential. If you can develop metrics or even formulas for things like resilience,
Yeah.
then you can start to compare different systems, track progress over time and move beyond these purely subjective assessments.
That's huge.
It is. It's bringing a different kind of rigor to the conversation.
Yeah, it's like adding a layer of precision.
Right.
And it sounds like incorporating engineering perspectives can also bring a lot of value to the people in the lab.
Absolutely, because by including engineers, you're naturally bringing in these diverse cultures and viewpoints that you might not typically find in a more traditional design setting.
Right.
And this variety of thought can really create that productive disturbance.
Yeah.
That leads to richer learning and more profound insights.
So it's not just about the technical tools.
Right.
It's about the diverse ways of thinking
Exactly.
that engineers bring to the table.
Yeah.
And the sources kept coming back to this idea of technology as a bridge.
Yeah.
Like technology is this crucial element,
Yeah.
but it needs to be integrated with approaches that are rooted in the humanities
Right.
to create this kind of human-machine collaboration
Yeah.
that we're going to need to tackle these future challenges.
I think that's key. It's not about technology replacing human ingenuity.
Yeah.
It's about finding ways for them to work together.
Totally. It's like technology amplifying human creativity
Exactly.
rather than replacing it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential benefits of engineering,
So,
the potential friction points. But the sources also offered a word of caution.
yes, definitely.
Yeah. What was that?
Well, while recognizing the significant contributions of engineering, it's crucial to be aware of the potential pitfalls of a purely reductionist approach. We don't want to lose sight of that holistic perspective that's so fundamental to systemic design.
Yeah. It's like finding that balance
Right.
between breaking things down to understand them, but not losing sight of the interconnectedness of it all.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about engineering. Let's shift gears a bit and talk about art.
Okay.
In the context of a systemic design lab, how does art fit in? I mean, it almost feels like the opposite of engineering in some ways.
Yeah, it's a natural reaction to think that.
Yeah.
And, in some ways, the material positions art as a counterpoint to engineering. So where engineering might prioritize standardization and quantifiable results, art emphasizes letting go of control, trusting intuition, and embracing the unexpected.
Interesting. So it's about moving away from that really structured, process-driven thinking
Exactly.
that can sometimes dominate problem-solving approaches.
It's about stepping outside those predefined creative methodologies and allowing for nonlinearity, for these unexpected leaps in perspective.
And this is where it can get really interesting. One of the sources even connected art to the idea of magic.
Oh.
Which is such a fascinating concept in this context.
It is.
So how does that work? How is art like magic?
Well, the idea is that art has this potential to make the intangible aspects of systems visible, like those underlying patterns, the hidden structures, the iceberg metaphor.
Right.
Art, through its various forms of expression, can help us perceive and understand those elements.
I love that. That really speaks to that desire for those aha moments.
Right. It's like suddenly you see something that was always there,
Yeah.
but you just couldn't perceive it before.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So art provides this totally different lens, a way to see beyond the surface level and reveal deeper truths about how these systems work.
Exactly.
And it sounds like the sources are advocating for a really unconstrained approach to art in the lab.
Absolutely. The emphasis is on freeing up creativity, moving beyond these time-bound, space-defined exercises.
Yeah.
It's about this limitless creative engagement with the system,
Yeah.
really pushing towards the unknown.
And encouraging that emergence.
Yes.
Now, this leads to a really interesting question that one of the sources brought up. What if we flip the script entirely?
Okay.
And instead of a systemic design lab, we had a systemic art lab?
Oh, wow.
I mean, that's a pretty radical idea.
It is. It really makes you question those fundamental assumptions about what the lab is supposed to be.
Right. Like, could art be the primary driver
Wow.
of unlocking potential and generating those insights?
That's a fascinating thought experiment.
It is. And the sources also talked about the role of art, not just in like positive creation,
Right.
but also when we're facing crises.
Yeah, because the power of art to explore these non-practical, unexpected realms becomes particularly relevant when we're talking about profound future transformation, not just adapting to the current challenges.
So it's about envisioning possibilities that we might not even be able to think of
Right.
through purely logical or analytical thinking.
Exactly.
And it's not just visual art.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
The sources highlighted art's capacity to tap into these non-visual experiences.
Okay.
Things like vibrations, even states of being.
Wow.
It's almost like hearkening back to a worldview where phenomena held these deeper, less readily explainable meanings,
Hmm.
and art can help us reconnect with those more intuitive ways of understanding.
It's like engaging with the system on this deeper, more sensory level.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about engineering, we've talked about art. Let's move on to embodied practices.
Okay.
This is a term that might not be familiar to everyone.
Yeah.
So what exactly does it mean in the context of a systemic design lab?
So, embodied practices in this context refer to ways of knowing and learning that actively involve the whole body, not just abstract intellectualization.
Okay.
It's about moving from just thinking with our heads to engaging our physical selves in the process of understanding and driving change.
So give me an example of what that might look like.
Sure. Imagine instead of just listing out all the stakeholders in a system on a whiteboard,
Yeah.
you actually physically map them out in a room
Mm.
and you feel the distances and the connections between them.
Wow.
That's the kind of deeper understanding that embodied practice can bring.
So it's like a much more visceral, hands-on approach to knowledge.
Exactly.
And the sources really emphasize the importance of connecting these ideas with the real world.
Oh, absolutely. The materials stress the need to test ideas at full scale in real-world settings
Hmm.
and to engage in genuine relational exchange with a diverse range of individuals.
So it's not just about theorizing.
Right.
It's about getting out there and talking to people
Yeah. One example they gave was discussing the concept of regeneration at a gas station.
at a gas station.
Yeah. It's about taking these ideas to unexpected places.
I love that. That's so cool. It's like bringing the abstract down to earth.
Right.
And the sources argued that this kind of embodiment is absolutely crucial for things like regeneration.
Yes. The point was that true regeneration requires being physically present and engaged,
Hmm.
not just having theoretical discussions in a lab.
Right. You need that direct feedback,
Yeah.
that real world experience
Exactly.
to really grasp what's happening and what needs to change.
Right.
So it's about experiencing the system firsthand,
Yeah.
not just studying it from a distance.
Yeah. And it's about cultivating this deeper personal stake in the outcomes.
Hmm.
Embodied practice fosters a deeper investment and commitment to the world around us.
Okay.
It cultivates this sense of interbeing, this feeling of interconnectedness
Yeah.
that moves beyond these purely intellectual or detached approaches.
So it's not just about finding solutions out there. It's about recognizing our own role within the system.
Exactly.
And this raises a really interesting question that one of the sources posed.
Okay.
Does incorporating embodied experience help a systemic design lab move beyond this purely clinical approach to designing change?
That's a great question. And I think the answer is yes. By acknowledging the living dynamic nature of these systems,
Yeah.
embodied practices can help us avoid that purely analytical, detached approach.
Right. It's about recognizing that these aren't just mechanistic systems,
Uh-huh.
but complex, evolving entities that we are a part of.
Exactly.
And the sources were careful to point out the danger of just intellectualizing this concept of living systems.
Yes. You can't just talk about them in the abstract. You
Yeah.
have to actually experience them.
Yeah, you need that lived experience.
Exactly.
This is interesting. One of the sources suggested that even our everyday embodied experiences, even the negative ones like weathering a thunderstorm, can actually help build our resilience.
Right. What's interesting there is that those small-scale personal experiences of change and disruption
Yeah.
can actually serve as training for understanding and navigating larger-scale systemic shifts.
This is like our bodies are learning
Yeah,
through these direct experiences.
they are.
Wow. Okay, let's move on to the realm of inner processes.
Okay.
Now, this feels connected to the embodied practices we were just talking about,
Yeah,
but with more of a focus on our internal landscape.
right. There's definitely overlap. The sources talk about expanding this concept of inner processes beyond the typical ideas of mindfulness and meditation,
Hmm.
which, those are valuable.
Yeah.
But the material also highlights dealing with trauma and crisis
Wow.
as potential drivers of transition and resilience.
So it's about acknowledging that our internal experiences, even the difficult ones, can actually be sources of growth and change.
Exactly.
And the sources also pointed out that the line between inner and outer processes isn't always so clear.
That's right. They're not separate entities operating in isolation.
Our inner world is constantly interacting with and being shaped by the outer world.
Yeah, totally. And one of the sources brought up this idea about how rigidly holding on to our expectations can actually create pain and hinder our ability to adapt.
Right. It's like we have this fixed idea of how things should be.
Yeah.
And when reality doesn't match up,
Yeah.
we suffer.
It makes it harder to change.
Exactly.
So how do we get better at letting go of those expectations?
Well, the source used this analogy of observing children or animals who often seem much more adaptable because they're not burdened by these fixed expectations.
Yeah.
They're just more present.
Right. It's like they're rolling with the punches.
Exactly.
And it sounds like a systemic design lab could also be a space for intentionally exploring these inner journeys.
Absolutely. The suggestion is that the lab should provide a safe and supportive environment for individual inner exploration, and that this kind of work can be crucial for fostering adaptation. Okay. And the sources even talked about the possibility of finding well-being, even happiness in the midst of a crisis.
Yes, because context really shapes meaning. Even in challenging times, deeper human connections can form, and a sense of shared purpose can emerge.
Right.
They gave the example of Tel Aviv in the aftermath of a crisis, and how those shared experiences really fostered this profound sense of community.
So it's like finding meaning and connection even in the midst of difficulty.
Exactly.
And the sources emphasize that genuine investment in solutions requires this personal connection.
Yeah, it has to go beyond just economic or social outcomes.
Right.
The crisis needs to feel personal to drive deep change.
It can't just be an abstract problem.
Exactly.
And this brings us back to that balance between realism and purism.
Right.
It sounds like cultivating a deep personal investment is key for driving transformative change.
It is. And on a final note about these inner processes, the material suggests that this kind of inner work might be essential for fostering deeper connections and enabling true collaboration. You know, in contexts where we're relatively comfortable, like much of the global north, that deep level of collaboration might not feel necessary. Right. But when we're facing crises together, it becomes crucial.
And that requires this inner awareness and understanding.
Exactly.
So it's like our inner state really influences our ability to connect with others and work together effectively.
Yes.
Wow, this has been an incredibly insightful exploration.
It has.
Let's take a moment to just recap the key connections we've uncovered.
Okay.
So we've seen how engineering can be this structured enabler within the lab, providing tools and methodologies for understanding these complex systems.
Right.
And how art serves as this catalyst for unexpected insights.
Yeah.
Helping us to see beyond the obvious and make the invisible visible.
Right.
And then finally, how embodied and inner practices offer these pathways to deeper understanding and resilience.
Yes.
Cultivating personal investment and revealing our interconnectedness within these living systems.
They each offer unique ways of knowing.
Yeah.
And when they're integrated,
Right.
they can lead to truly innovative approaches to the challenges we face.
So it's clear that engineering art and embodied practices are all essential ingredients for a systemic design lab that aims to create meaningful change.
I think so.
So as you reflect on this deep dive, I want you to consider this.
Okay.
How might you integrate these things into your own life? The precision of engineering,
Yeah.
the freedom of artistic exploration,
Right.
and the awareness of embodied practices. How could you bring those together to approach the challenges you face, whether it's in your work, your community, or even your personal life?
Yeah.
Think about which of these areas resonates most strongly with you,
Okay.
and where maybe stepping outside your comfort zone and exploring the others might lead to some breakthroughs you never expected.
That's a great challenge.
It is.
I'm going to have to think about that.
I am too.